This is Michelle here, covering today's concepts, which are assessment, including classroom assessment techniques, general course policies, and ungrading. So we're going to start off with assessment. Now, what is it that you all think of when you think assessment? In most cases, it probably looks like this. Some sort of multiple choice or blue book exam, or maybe an essay. These are typical forms of assessment, but what else might be out there? What about a minute paper, where it's a type of essay that is done in just a minute, where students are given a topic to write about after a section is completed in class or at the end of a lecture period. An advantage of such is that they provide manageable amounts of timely and useful feedback, or a muddiest point reflection, where the guiding question might be, what was the most confusing concept that we discussed today? This technique enables students to engage in reflection and self-assessment regarding their greatest areas of confusion. You could even do a group discussion. This is not for the student to win an argument or to amuse their classmates, but rather the purpose of a discussion is to help each group member explore and discover personal meanings of a subject through interaction with other people. So what about these? So the three activities that I just listed are what are known as classroom assessment techniques, or CATs for short. These are simply ways to be able to assess if your students are achieving the stated learning objectives. CATs are your tool of measuring student learning. Too often when we're in front of a classroom, it's incredibly hard to tell what's actually going on with students. Are they asleep because it's 8 a.m. or because I've just bored them to death? Do they all get it, or just that one student who always responds? CATs are your tool to answer the question, how'd it go? Combine CATs with SLOs, and you can say, my learning objective was met by the majority of students. Without these tools, all you can say is, I think okay. So what are CATs really? Well, CATs are simple, ungraded, in-class activities designed to give you and your students useful feedback on the teaching learning process as it is happening. You begin at the end, what you want students to know or be able to do by the end, and you build up from there. This gives you a starting place. It tells you to begin where you want students to end up and figure out how to get them there from their current standpoint. It also solves the problem posed by the student who asks, why are we doing this? If you're using a backward course design approach, the answer is always there. You're having students do a particular activity with a learning outcome in mind. You might notice that CATs are a lot like active learning. This is true. One of the main benefits of active learning is the ability it gives you to gauge student understanding. Some examples of CATs include informal check-ins, asking any questions, online polls like Kahoot, printed questionnaires, in-class activities, discussions, quizzes, minute papers, muddiest point, etc. You might notice that CATs are a lot like active learning, again, because one of the main benefits of active learning is the ability to gauge that student understanding. So going back to our previous slide, what about exams and essays? Well, those are also indeed assessments, but these are summative in nature. In assessing what assessment you really need, yes, the pun was intended, you need to think about whether the assessment needs to be summative or formative. A summative assessment is intended to assess student performance. It will occur at the end of the instructional period in order to collect evidence of student knowledge, skill, or proficiency, and will occur via exit learning products or a cumulative assessment. A formative assessment is different in that it helps students to learn and practice taking place throughout the course in order to identify gaps and improve learning via approaches that support specific student needs. In your formative assessments, your main goal is to get a sense of student understanding, provide them with feedback, and modify your teaching as necessary. So, some examples of summative assessments are exams, which are easy to design and grade, but don't necessarily reveal the student's thought process. Essays and lab reports can observe the student throughout the process, or the student's thought process, but they are labor intensive to design and grade. Projects allow students to express themselves and take ownership over their learning, but of course, it's harder to grade creative work. So just keep these in mind, these pros and cons, as you go about deciding which summative assessments to employ in your course design. You can even turn summative assessments into formative assessments by allowing retakes, scaffolding the assignment, by making an exam open book, or asking students to explain their exam answers. You might also employ concept maps, fact sheets, infographics, multimedia projects using video and/or audio, class presentations, and journal entries. Now, the last thing in assessment is to ensure that your learning goals, teaching and learning activities, and feedback and assessment are all aligned with one another. Moving on to course policies. Some course policies you might want on your syllabus include issues of academic honesty, which we'll talk about an example of on the next slide, but covers the realms of cheating and plagiarism, including self-plagiarism. There's also absences, late work, regrades, email etiquette, and health accommodation policy. Shout out to Darby Vickers and Will Howitz for the information on this slide. UCI's academic integrity policy can be found on the Office of Academic Integrity and Student Conduct's website, and it reads, academic misconduct in its most basic form is gaining or attempting to gain a grade, degree, or other academic accomplishment by any means other than through your own work. The formal policy states no student shall engage in any activity that involves attempting to receive a grade by means other than honest effort and shall not aid another student who is attempting to do so. Feel free to implement this quote or simply keep this information in mind as you address this course policy on your own syllabus. As for late work and regrade policy, here is an example from Helen's course. Her late policy is that all perusal annotations, weekly summaries, and journal entries will be accepted 24 hours late without penalty. She goes on to stipulate that students contact her no later than 24 hours past the due date if in need of an extension for any of the assignments. Otherwise, all late assignments will be deducted 10% for each day they are late beyond the 24-hour grace period, and that regrades will only be considered for journal entries and the final paper. Any student wishing to have an assignment regrade must submit a half-page explanation within 72 hours of receiving the grade. So this is from UCI's Teach Anywhere blog, and it reflects campus policies and procedures for spring quarter 2022, but it's also good standard language that can be included in your syllabus for health accommodations policy. So let's face it, we are still in a pandemic whether or not the university wants us masking or not. In any case, language on class attendance might state that attending class meetings is important. However, if you think that you might have a contagious illness, COVID-19 or anything else, please do not attend class. Information about how to deal with absences can be found in the syllabus, and then you can provide a link to the appropriate place. For students, when they come to class, you could stipulate that they must have completed the daily symptom check and/or they must comply with UCI's executive directive on face coverings. A final reminder that the course formatting might change is key too. So for example, please keep in mind that UCI leadership is actively monitoring campus and community COVID-19 case rates and is in regular consultation with local public health authorities should conditions worsen or if new or local public health orders are issued. This course may switch from in-person or hybrid to fully remote. Now, some quick tips. First up, prepare at least the first 2 weeks of the course completely, including all lesson plans, etc. This way you won't fall behind. I think we all know that the quarter system flies like a bird. Next, have strong communication with students from the start. That means giving students all the major deadlines at the start via assignments on Canvas so that they can see the schedule and plan accordingly. You might even introduce an informal platform like Discord for students to communicate with you and or peers, but this is totally optional and according to your own level of comfort. Tiny tip number 3, do double check all of your campus links to make sure that they are working properly. You can do such by going to your course Canvas page, going to settings, and then course details, and just clicking on validate links and content on that right-hand panel. It will take you to this page, the course link validator, which searches course content for invalid or unreachable links and images. Final tip, have someone else look over your syllabus, especially to check for alignment. It never hurts to get an extra set of eyes on a document you've poured so much time into for things you might have turned a blind eye to. So, to summarize what we've kind of gone over already in the program, remember that the elements of a syllabus include both substance and style. So for substance, you have necessary and optional components. Necessary components include course description, course and instructor information, course goals, general timeline, grade breakdown, potential readings and assignments, and an inclusivity statement. Optional components include hyperlinks to materials and specific page numbers. As for style, consider playing with the font, adding images, or changing the spacing in your syllabus. Shout out to Thomas Kuclo and Marianne Mendoza for the information on this slide. Now I want to raise the question of, well, what if I don't like giving out grades? I might just have the solution for you. So for the final part of this video, I will be covering the concept of ungrading. So according to ungrading.net, ungrading is the process of leaving out grades, but is not a method in which teachers stop evaluating students. Instead, they are constantly evaluating their students' progress by giving feedback or tips to help them improve. The ungrading movement is certainly afoot and is catching the spirit of educators in K through 12 and increasingly in higher education. It's built on deep principles of learning and human dignity, but it's not easy, especially for experienced teachers, to give up all of the dimensions of our conventional practices. Well, why wouldn't we like grading? First of all, grading requires uniformity. It assumes uniform input, uniform process, and uniform output. But students don't start out the same. They don't have the same life experiences. They don't go to the same places afterward. They have different goals. And as such, we can encourage such diverse experiences without grading. Further, if grades don't provide adequate information, if the purpose of grades is to convey a student's accomplishment, adequacy, excellence, compliance, effort, and or gain in learning, then they fail. Is a student who enters already knowing a lot and continues to demonstrate knowledge at a high level, but then misses an assignment because of a roommate's attempted suicide and ends up with a B+, the same as someone who begins knowing nothing, works really hard, follows all the rules, does quite well, and ends up with a B+? What information is conveyed? What about someone who loves biology and excels in those classes, but who loves history, bombs in history classes, and ends up with a 3.0 GPA? Compared to someone who muddles through every class and has a similar GPA, yet with no passion, excellent, or highs or lows, what do we learn from the GPA? What does a course grade mean? And finally, grades don't truly motivate students. Experts distinguish different types of motivation: one, intrinsic, or doing things for their own sake, and two, extrinsic, or doing things for the external benefits not inherently part of the activities themselves. Some even say that fear and avoidance are just as big motivators, or doing something to avoid negative consequence. So why ungrade? Well, it has benefits. First of all, motivation. Not having grades motivates students to take risks without getting a bad grade for doing it. It also encourages real learning so that students think of the course as a way to learn more, not just something else to memorize. And finally, less fear. Grades create fear of failing, and a bad grade makes students feel they're not capable of achieving something. Whether or not you grade and how you grade is entirely up to you. However, I want to leave you all with some foundational questions and notes to ponder on before our synchronous session. Firstly, who's assessment for? How does this question force us to rethink how institutions structure their systems for evaluation? Second, what's the difference between grading and feedback? To what extent should teachers be readers of students' work as opposed to evaluators? Third, why do we grade? How does it feel to be graded? What do we want grading to do or not do in our classes for students or teachers? And finally, what would happen if we didn't grade? What would be the benefits? What issues would this raise for students and or teachers?